Ladies and gentlemen, right this very moment, there's pretty much a full-scale civil war breaking out inside of the United States Supreme Court, and no, I'm not joking. Right this very moment, a full-blown ideological meltdown is happening because of the Supreme Court's late-night decision to block President Trump's ability to deport violent illegal immigrants. And to give you all a sense of just how heated things have gotten inside of the Supreme Court, Justice Alito, one of the only two justices who voted in favor of President Trump's lawful use of the Alien Enemies Act, just released what might be the most scathing Supreme Court dissent in recent American history. Here's what he had to say. In sum, literally in the middle of the night, the court issued unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party within 8 hours of receiving the application, with dubious factual support for its order, and without providing any explanation for its order. I refused to join the court's order because we had no good reason to think that, under the circumstances, issuing an order at midnight was necessary or appropriate. Translation: Supreme Court Justice Alito is saying that the Supreme Court just set a midnight fire to its own credibility. Justice Alito is absolutely blasting the other Supreme Court justices for tossing out due process not for illegal immigrants, but for the sitting president of the United States of America. And you know what? Supreme Court Justice Alito is absolutely right. This wasn't just a bad decision, it was a political stunt. President Trump wasn't even given time to present his case before the Supreme Court dropped the hammer. It's a judicial ambush, plain and simple. And I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, here's the real cost of this hasty and premature Supreme Court decision. Because of this decision, national security has now been compromised. Because this wasn't just a procedural dispute, no, this was about stopping the deportation of dangerous foreign nationals, some of whom are suspected affiliates of the Tren de Aragua cartel terrorist organization. This Supreme Court ruling ultimately does nothing other than shield and protect violent Venezuelan gangbangers that shouldn't even be in the country in the first place. The same court, by the way, that sat quietly for years as tens of millions of illegal immigrant invaders crossed the border is now jumping out of its seat to stop President Trump from deporting cartel-linked gang members. And you know what? Here's the kicker. According to CNN's own polling, 56% of Americans support President Trump's plan to deport every illegal immigrant in the country. That means that this Supreme Court ruling doesn't just defy national security, it ultimately defies the will of the American people. This Supreme Court ruling is nothing other than judicial overreach at the highest level. This court, which is supposed to be a neutral interpreter of the law, is now playing part-time activist and full-time presidential obstructionist. And as you saw, Justice Alito did not mince his words. He said the majority's ruling had, quote, no good reason for happening when it did. There were no urgent deportations scheduled, no imminent threat that justified their 1 a.m. ruling. This was political 100%. And you know what? Let's be very clear about what this actually means. The Supreme Court prioritized the rights of foreign criminals over the safety of American families. That is the real headline amongst all of this. Here's the truth. The Alien Enemies Act is an existing law. It gives the president broad authority to remove threats from foreign nations in times of national danger. It has been used by past presidents on numerous occasions, and it is 100% constitutional. But apparently, if the president invoking the act happens to be President Trump, then the law doesn't really matter anymore. And you know what? Let me ask you all a question. Where was the Supreme Court when Joe Biden and the Democrats allowed 20 million illegal invaders to pour into our country across the southern border? Oh yeah, that's right. They did nothing. They were asleep at the wheel. And I'll tell you what, here's the most infuriating part about all of this. The progressive left is now screaming that every single one of these illegal immigrant invaders that President Trump wants to deport should be entitled to due process. Excuse me, every single one of these illegal immigrants already skipped due process when they chose to enter the United States illegally. Here's my controversial opinion of the day. I don't think illegal immigrants deserve due process. None of them cared about due process when they entered the country illegally, so why should we care about giving them due process when we seek to get rid of them? You can't break into someone's house and then demand a jury trial before they kick you out. That's not how reality works. That's not how our country works. And yet, the Democrats and the left-wing media and now the Supreme Court are all bending over backwards to protect the very people who chose to ignore our nation's laws. And by the way, just a quick reminder, it was the Democrats who refused to enforce our nation's federal immigration laws in the first place. It was their open border agenda that allowed this invasion to happen. But now that President Trump is trying to clean up the mess that they made, the courts suddenly have a problem. Now they care about procedure. Now they care about timing and due process. Folks, the absolute hypocrisy coming from the progressive left is honestly exhausting. These very same people ignored every due process, every legal precedent, and every national security warning while the country was being overrun by illegal immigrant invaders. And now that we want to get rid of them, the Democrats, the progressives, want due process for every single one of the 20 million illegal immigrants that they let into the country. Give me a freaking break. But okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's the truth. Here's a little bit of positivity. Justice Alito's and Justice Clarence Thomas' dissent shows that not all hope is lost. There are still Supreme Court justices on the bench that are willing to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. Keep in mind, as controversial as this Supreme Court ruling was, it was really just a temporary hold while the alien enemies case works its way through the lower federal courts. So what that means is that this isn't over. In fact, it's just getting started. But ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you what right now, the America First movement is not backing down. The border will be secured, and all of these illegal immigrant invaders will be deported. Because, folks, that is what all of this is about. Finally, putting America first. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up with today's video, I want to say real quick that I've actually gone ahead and made a community Facebook page where I'll be posting additional news and updates as it relates to all of this. So if you guys use Facebook, check out the pinned comment down below and give that page a follow. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there. If you guys enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.